The photograph arrived at my London flat on a Tuesday morning, slipped under my door while I slept. No envelope, no postage marks, just a single image printed on glossy paper, showing me, 20 years younger, covered in dust, standing in front of something that, officially, doesn't exist. On the back, written in handwriting I recognized immediately, were 4 words. "They know you talked." I haven't worked for MI6 in 18 years. I'd convinced myself that chapter of my life was sealed, buried under layers of non-disclosure agreements and the comfortable amnesia that comes with retirement. But that photograph, taken in the Covert desert in 2005, brought everything back. The heat, the darkness, the sound of something moving in tunnels that stretched deeper than our equipment could measure. My name is Michael Ashford, and before you click away thinking this is another conspiracy theory video, I need you to understand something. I'm risking everything by telling you this. Not my reputation, that's already compromised. Not my pension, they can have it. I'm risking something far more important, but we'll get to that. If you want to hear what really happened beneath that Iranian desert, what my team discovered in a facility that's been erased from every database, every satellite image, every official record, then you need to stay until the end of this video. Hit that subscribe button right now, because if this video suddenly disappears, you'll want to know where to find me next. Let me take you back to March of 2005. I was 34 years old, a field intelligence officer with MI6, specializing in what we called technical reconnaissance in the Middle East. That's a polite way of saying I broke into places I wasn't supposed to be and documented things other people wanted to keep hidden. I'd been doing it for 9 years by that point. Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. I was good at my job. Good enough that when something particularly sensitive came up, my name was usually on the short list. The briefing came at Vauxhall Cross on a gray March morning. I remember the weather because I remember thinking it might be the last time I'd complain about London rain. My section chief, a woman named Patricia Harrow, who'd spent 20 years in signals intelligence before moving to operations, met me in one of the secure conference rooms on the 4th floor. The ones with the copper mesh in the walls that block all electronic signals. "We have a situation in Iran," she said, sliding a folder across the table. The folder was thin, too thin for a standard operational brief. German intelligence intercepted communications 3 weeks ago. Scientific terminology, equipment manifests, power consumption records that don't match any known facility in the region. I opened the folder. Inside were 6 pages of translated intercepts, 3 satellite images, and a topographical map of the Covert, the Great Salt Desert in north-central Iran, one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. Summer temperatures that could hit 50 degrees Celsius, winter nights that dropped below freezing, a landscape so hostile that even nomadic tribes avoided it. "What are we looking at?" I asked. "We don't know," Patricia said. "That's why you're going." The satellite images showed what looked like an abandoned mining operation, a cluster of low buildings, some excavation equipment, access roads that led nowhere. But one of the images, taken with thermal imaging, showed something else: heat signatures emanating from underground, consistent with significant electrical activity. Not the scattered warmth of geothermal vents, but organized, distributed, artificial. The communications mentioned deep storage retrieval and containment protocol verification, Patricia continued. The power consumption we're tracking could support a facility the size of a small town, but there's nothing visible on the surface beyond those few buildings. "Nuclear?" I asked. It was the obvious question. Iran's nuclear program was the intelligence community's primary focus in that region. "We don't think so. The radiation signature is wrong. The equipment manifests mention climate control systems, seismic stabilization, and something called atmospheric reconstitution. None of that fits with nuclear enrichment or weapons development." She leaned forward, and I saw something in her expression I'd rarely seen before: uncertainty. The Germans think it might be archaeological in nature, she said. They intercepted a conversation between two scientists discussing preservation of original artifacts and maintaining pre-extraction conditions. MI6 leadership wants verification. If Iran is digging up something that could shift regional power dynamics, we need to know what it is. The mission parameters were straightforward on paper. Infiltrate the facility, document whatever was there, extract without engagement. I'd have a two-person support team, a signal specialist to handle communications and electronic surveillance, and a combat medic with field experience in hostile territory. We'd insert via a civilian cargo flight to Turkmenistan, cross the border using established smuggling routes, and approach the facility under the cover of a scheduled dust storm that meteorological forecasting predicted for the following week. Simple, clean, routine. I should have known better. My team assembled in Ashgabat 3 days later. The signal specialist was a man named David Chen, mid-30s, born in Hong Kong but raised in Manchester, with a gift for languages and electronic systems that bordered on supernatural. He could listen to encrypted radio traffic and identify the encryption protocol just from the carrier wave modulation. The medic was Sarah Vance, early 40s, former Royal Army Medical Corps, who'd done 4 tours in Iraq and had more combat experience than most infantry officers. She was there because the mission profile indicated we might encounter security forces, and someone needed to know how to patch bullet holes. We spent 2 days going over the approach route, memorizing the facility layout from the limited satellite imagery, and rehearsing our emergency extraction protocols. David set up our communication systems, a series of burst transmitters that would send compressed data packets to a relay station in Azerbaijan every 6 hours. If we missed 2 consecutive transmissions, an extraction team would be dispatched to our last known coordinates. The night before we crossed the border, Sarah asked me a question I should have taken more seriously. "What's the worst-case scenario here, Michael?" I was checking my equipment. A compact digital camera designed to look like a civilian model, but equipped with military-grade image stabilization and encryption. A satellite phone disguised as a portable radio, climbing gear, and enough supplies for 5 days in the desert. "We get spotted, we abort and extract," I said. "Standard protocol." "No," Sarah said. She was cleaning her medical kit, organizing supplies with the methodical precision that came from doing it 1,000 times. "I mean the worst-case scenario for why we're really here. If this facility is what British intelligence thinks it might be, something archaeological, something old, what's the scenario where that matters to national security?" It was a good question, one I'd been avoiding thinking about too carefully. "Maybe they found something that could legitimize territorial claims," I said. "Ancient Persian Empire evidence, something that could justify expanding borders or asserting dominance over archaeological sites in neighboring countries." Sarah looked at me with an expression that suggested she knew I was reaching. "Or maybe," she said quietly, "they found something they don't understand, and we're being sent to figure out if it's dangerous." The next night, we crossed into Iran. The smuggling route took us through a series of dry riverbeds and mountain passes that had been used for centuries to move goods between Central Asia and Persia. Our guides were ethnic Turkmen who cared nothing for borders or politics, only for the substantial payment waiting for them on the other side. They left us at a predetermined point 30 kilometers from the facility, as agreed, and disappeared back into the darkness. We traveled at night, navigating by GPS and compass, moving through a landscape that felt less like Earth and more like Mars. The Dasht covert during the day was unbearable, heat that radiated up from the salt flats in visible waves, air so dry it cracked your lips within minutes. But at night, it was beautiful in a harsh, alien way. Stars so bright they cast shadows, silence so complete you could hear your own heartbeat. It took us 2 nights to reach the facility. We spent the daylight hours buried in thermal reflective shelters, sleeping in shifts, drinking carefully rationed water, and eating concentrated ration bars that tasted like compressed cardboard. We reached the perimeter on the 3rd night, just after midnight. The satellite images hadn't done it justice. The surface structures were larger than they'd appeared from orbit. 3 main buildings constructed from poured concrete, weathered by sandstorms but still solid, connected by covered walkways. Security lighting, but not much of it. 2 guard posts at the main entrance, both manned. A chain-link fence topped with razor wire encircling the compound. But it was what we couldn't see from satellite that caught my attention immediately. The ventilation shafts. There were dozens of them, scattered across the compound in what seemed like a random pattern, but was actually carefully organized. Each shaft was about 1 meter in diameter, covered with heavy mesh grills, and every single one of them was venting air upward. I could see the heat distortion even in the darkness, warm air rising from underground, creating small vertical columns of thermal differential. David set up his electronic surveillance equipment on a ridge overlooking the facility, careful to position the antennas below the sightline of anyone in the compound. Within 20 minutes, he was intercepting radio communications. 2 security teams, he whispered, one hand pressed to his headphone, 4 personnel each, standard patrol patterns, rotating every 4 hours. They're using commercial radio, not military encryption, confident they're isolated enough not to worry about intercepts. What are they saying? I asked. David listened for another minute. Mostly routine check-ins, perimeter secure, systems nominal, but there's something else. He adjusted his frequency scanner. There's a second communication channel, much lower bandwidth, automated transmissions, looks like sensor telemetry or environmental monitoring data. From underground? Sarah asked. Has to be. The signal strength suggests it's originating from at least 50 meters below surface level, maybe deeper. We observed for 3 hours, documenting patrol patterns, identifying camera positions, mapping out the facility's external security. The guard presence was lighter than I'd expected for a facility this sensitive, only 8 personnel, and they seemed more focused on keeping people out than preventing anything from leaving. That should have been my second warning sign. At 300 hours, we made our approach. Sarah stayed on the ridge with the communication equipment, maintaining overwatch while David and I descended toward the facility. The plan was to breach through one of the ventilation shafts on the northern perimeter, far enough from the guard posts to avoid immediate detection, but close enough to the main structures that we could access whatever underground facility those heat signatures indicated. The fence was simple chain link. David used wire cutters to open a gap large enough to crawl through, careful to leave the cut section supported so it wouldn't sag and create an obvious breach point. We moved in a low crouch across 30 meters of open ground to the nearest ventilation shaft, every second expecting alarm lights or gunfire. Nothing, just the whisper of wind across salt and the distant hum of generators. The ventilation shaft grill was secured with 4 heavy bolts. David had brought a battery-powered impact driver that made quick work of them, and within 2 minutes we had the grill lifted free. I shone a light down into the shaft. It descended vertically for about 20 meters before angling off to the side. The walls were smooth concrete, professionally constructed, with metal rungs set into the wall forming a ladder, and rising up from below was a steady flow of warm air that smelled wrong. Not chemical, not organic decay, something else, something mineral and ancient, like the smell of caves that have been sealed for millennia. David looked at me. We doing this? I keyed my radio. Sarah, we're going down. Mark our entry time at 03:17. Her voice crackled back. Confirmed. You have until 0600 before the shift change. That's 2 hours and 43 minutes. I went first, climbing down into darkness with only a small headlamp to guide me. The metal rungs were cold and slightly damp, condensation from the temperature differential between the desert surface and whatever climate-controlled environment existed below. 20 meters down, 30, 40. At 50 meters, the shaft leveled out into a horizontal tunnel, 2 meters in diameter, carved through solid rock. Not blasted, carved. The walls were too smooth, too precise for explosives. This looked like it had been excavated with some kind of mechanical boring equipment, every surface polished to an almost mirror finish. David dropped down beside me, and we paused to let our eyes adjust. The tunnel extended in both directions, curving slightly so we couldn't see more than about 30 meters in either direction. Fluorescent lights were set into the ceiling at regular intervals, giving everything a flat, shadowless quality. "Which way?" David whispered. I pulled out a compact digital compass, checking orientation, south, toward the center of the compound. We moved carefully, staying close to the wall, listening for any sound of approaching footsteps or voices. The tunnel curved and branched, connecting to other corridors in what was becoming clear was a massive underground network. Every 20 meters, we passed heavy metal doors set into the walls, sealed, locked, with small windows of reinforced glass that revealed only darkness beyond. But it was the depth that shocked me most. We descended 50 meters just to reach the first level of tunnels, but as we moved south, we passed several vertical shafts descending even deeper. I shone my light down one of them and couldn't see the bottom. 70 meters? 100? What could possibly require this much excavation in the middle of a desert? We'd been moving for about 15 minutes when David grabbed my arm, pointing ahead. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and spilling out into the corridor was light, not the sterile fluorescent of the tunnels, but something warmer, more yellow. We approached carefully, and what I saw when I looked into that chamber is something I've spent 18 years trying to rationalize, trying to fit into any framework of understanding that makes sense. The chamber was circular, about 40 meters in diameter, with a domed ceiling that rose at least 20 meters overhead. The walls were not concrete like the tunnels. They were stone, cut and fitted with such precision that I couldn't see any mortar or gaps between blocks. The style was ancient, pre-Islamic, possibly pre-Persian, with architectural elements I'd seen in books about Mesopotamian ruins, but never in anything this well preserved. But it was the objects in the center of the chamber that made my breath catch. There were 12 of them, arranged in a perfect circle around what looked like a stone pedestal. Each object was roughly cylindrical, about 2 meters tall and half a meter in diameter, made from a material that looked like polished black stone but reflected light in a way that stone shouldn't. The surface seemed to shift slightly as I watched, like oil on water, patterns moving across it that might have been carved symbols or might have been something else entirely. The temperature in the chamber was carefully controlled. I could hear the hum of climate systems working overtime. And the air had that same mineral smell, stronger now, mixed with something that reminded me of ozone after a lightning strike. David moved past me, pulling out his camera, and I heard him inhale sharply. "Michael," he whispered, "look at the pedestal." I moved closer, careful not to touch anything. The pedestal in the center was carved from a single piece of stone, covered in cuneiform script, ancient Mesopotamian writing that predated the Persian Empire by thousands of years. But interspersed with the cuneiform were other symbols I didn't recognize. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Angles that seemed wrong somehow, as if they existed in more dimensions than my eyes could properly process. And resting on top of the pedestal was a sphere. It was perhaps 20 centimeters in diameter, made from the same black material as the cylindrical objects, but this one was definitely moving. Patterns flowed across its surface in continuous waves, and as I watched, I realized they weren't random. They were repeating in sequences, like some kind of code or language being transmitted across the surface of the sphere. "Are you seeing this?" David had his camera up, taking rapid photographs, the shutter clicking in the silence of the chamber. "I'm seeing it," I said. "I don't know what I'm seeing, but I'm seeing it." I activated my own camera, documenting everything, the layout of the chamber, the arrangement of the objects, the inscriptions on the pedestal. The photographs would be automatically encrypted and stored on a secure memory card that I'd have to physically destroy if we were captured. "The cuneiform," David said, moving around the pedestal. "Can you read any of it?" I'd had basic training in ancient languages, enough to recognize major script families and identify significant historical periods, but not enough to translate complex texts. But some of the symbols I could make out. References to the deep ones, the sleepers beneath, the watchers who came before. Standard mythological terminology from ancient Mesopotamian religion, the kind of thing you'd find in any museum. Except this wasn't in a museum. This was in a secret underground facility in the Iranian desert, surrounded by objects that shouldn't exist. "We need to keep moving," I said. "Document everything we can, but we're on a clock." We spent 10 minutes in that chamber, photographing from every angle, taking measurements, recording everything we could. David used a handheld spectrometer to analyze the black material of the cylindrical objects. The readings came back inconclusive, suggesting a composite of elements that the device wasn't calibrated to identify. "This isn't reading as stone," David said, studying the display. "The molecular density is wrong. It's registering as crystalline in structure, but with properties that don't match any known crystalline material, and it's warm." "What do you mean, warm?" "I mean, it's generating heat. Not much, maybe 2 or 3 degrees above ambient temperature, but it's definitely producing thermal energy. These things are active, Michael. They're doing something." I moved closer to one of the cylinders, careful not to touch it. Up close, I could see that the patterns moving across its surface weren't random. They were synchronized. All 12 cylinders were displaying the same sequence of patterns, with a slight delay between each one, like a wave moving around the circle. And they were all oriented toward the sphere on the pedestal. "It's a system," I said, the realization hitting me. "These are individual objects. They're components of something larger. They're all connected somehow." "Connected to what?" David asked. Before I could answer, we both heard it. Footsteps in the tunnel outside, approaching quickly, accompanied by voices speaking in Farsi. We moved immediately, years of training overriding the paralysis of fear. There was a narrow alcove on the far side of the chamber, partially hidden behind one of the cylindrical objects. We pressed ourselves into the shadows just as 2 men entered the chamber. They weren't security guards. They were wearing white lab coats over civilian clothing, both carrying tablet computers, conversing in rapid Farsi that my limited knowledge of the language couldn't fully follow, but I caught fragments, readings, fluctuation, increased activity in Chamber 7. Chamber 7, which meant there were at least 7 of these rooms. The 2 men approached the pedestal, one of them tapping commands into his tablet. I watched as the sphere responded, the patterns on its surface accelerating, moving faster, the waves of symbols or code or whatever they were cycling through sequences more rapidly. The second man said something that included the word protocol and pointed to one of the cylindrical objects, the one David and I were hiding behind. My heart was hammering so hard I was certain they'd hear it. Sarah's voice would be crackling in my earpiece soon, asking for a status update, and I couldn't respond without giving away our position. The first man approached our cylinder, studying it closely, and for a moment I thought we were finished. But then an alarm sounded, distant, coming from deeper in the facility, and both men's radios crackled to life with urgent Farsi. They exchanged a quick conversation, then hurried out of the chamber, moving back toward the central tunnel system. David and I waited 30 seconds, standard protocol, then emerged from hiding. "What just happened?" David whispered. "I don't know, but we need to move. That alarm might be a security breach, or it might be a system malfunction, but either way, this facility is about to have more personnel moving around than we can avoid." We exited the chamber, moving back into the tunnel system, but instead of heading toward our entry point, I made a decision that I've questioned every day since. "We're going deeper," I said. "Michael, that's not the mission. The mission is to find out what they're hiding here. We found one chamber with 12 objects and a lot of questions. Both scientists mentioned Chamber 7. If there are multiple chambers, we need to know what's in them." It was a rationalization. The truth is, I needed to understand. I'd spent 9 years collecting intelligence on conventional threats, weapons programs, military installations, terrorist networks. This was something else entirely, something that violated every assumption I had about how the world worked, and I couldn't walk away without knowing more. David hesitated, then nodded. We both knew we were exceeding our operational parameters, but we also both knew that the intelligence value of what we'd already found justified the risk. We moved south through the tunnel system, descending another level via a service stairwell we found behind an unlocked door. The second level was busier. We could hear machinery operating, voices echoing from distant corridors, the hum of serious electrical power being distributed through heavy cables that ran along the ceiling. We passed more sealed chambers, each one with those small reinforced windows. I looked through one and saw essentially the same setup as the first chamber. Cylindrical objects arranged in a circle, a central pedestal, but the room was dark, the objects inactive or dormant. "How many of these are there?" David whispered. We kept moving, following the sound of machinery, and found ourselves in a gallery overlooking a much larger space. The gallery was protected by a metal railing and offered a view of what I can only describe as an industrial archaeology site. The chamber below us was enormous, at least 100 meters across, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness overhead. The floor was 50 meters below our position, and scattered across it were dozens of structures that looked like they'd been excavated from solid rock. Buildings, or what remained of buildings, constructed in that same ancient Mesopotamian style, with walls covered in cuneiform and those wrong-angled symbols. But it was clear these structures hadn't been built here and then buried. They'd been discovered here, underground, and the modern facility had been constructed around them. This wasn't a storage facility, this was an excavation site. Iran had found something beneath the desert, something old enough to have been buried under hundreds of thousands of years of geological deposits, and they'd built this entire complex to study it. Work lights illuminated sections of the ruins below, and I could see people moving around, archaeologists or scientists in protective gear, examining walls, taking measurements, carefully documenting everything. There was an excavator in one corner, apparently working to clear debris from around a partially collapsed structure. "This is impossible," David said. "This level of preservation, this deep underground. Michael, these structures should be crushed by the weight of the earth above them, the geological pressure alone." "I know. And the style, the architecture, this predates anything we found in Mesopotamia by, I don't even know, thousands of years." I was photographing everything, my camera's shutter working overtime. The ruins below us were extensive, suggesting not just a few buildings, but an entire settlement. A city buried so deep it had survived intact through epochs of geological time. And then I saw what was in the center of it all, a pit, circular, perhaps 20 meters across, descending into darkness. The ruins were arranged around it in concentric circles, like the entire settlement had been built to encircle this one feature. And at the edge of the pit, I could see modern scaffolding and equipment, lights on adjustable arms pointed down into the depths, cables and hoses descending into the darkness. "They're excavating something from the pit," I said. "That's what this is about. Those cylindrical objects in the chambers upstairs, they're not what they found. They're what they pulled out of there." David was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was shaky. "Michael, if those objects came from down there, from however deep that pit goes, what else is still down there?" It was the right question, and I didn't want to know the answer. My radio crackled, Sarah's voice urgent. "Phantom 1, you've missed your check-in. Status?" I keyed the transmit button twice, the signal for operational, maintaining radio silence, but didn't risk speaking. Sarah's voice came back. "Understood. Be advised, I'm tracking increased vehicle movement on the access road. Multiple contacts approaching the facility. Recommend immediate extraction." Multiple contacts. Reinforcements, probably responding to whatever alarm had gone off earlier. Our window was closing. "We need to leave," David said. "Now." He was right. We'd gathered more intelligence than we'd hoped for, photographs of technology that shouldn't exist, documentation of archaeological ruins that contradicted everything we knew about human history, evidence that Iran was studying something so significant they'd built a massive underground facility in one of the most remote locations on Earth to keep it hidden. But I couldn't stop looking at that pit. Something about it pulled at me, a fascination that felt less like curiosity and more like compulsion. 2 minutes, I said. "I need to see what's down there." "Michael." 2 minutes. I found an access stairway leading down to the excavation floor, and before David could stop me, I was descending. The stairs were metal, industrial, bolted to the rock wall, and they rang slightly with each footstep despite my attempts at stealth. The excavation floor was colder than the upper levels, the climate control working hard to maintain stable conditions for the ruins. I moved between the ancient structures, staying low, keeping to the shadows where the worklights didn't reach. Up close, the ruins were even more disturbing. The stonework was too precise, too mathematically perfect. The walls met at angles that seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them, and the cuneiform inscriptions covered every surface, in dense layers, text upon text, as if the builders had been desperate to record something. I reached the edge of the pit and looked down. The scaffolding descended at least 50 meters before disappearing into darkness that the worklights couldn't penetrate. But I could see shapes down there, geometric forms that might have been more buildings or might have been something else. And I could hear something, a sound so low it was more vibration than noise, a deep thrumming that seemed to come from the rock itself. "Michael," David's voice, urgent from somewhere behind me. I turned and saw him at the base of the stairway, gesturing frantically. And then I heard what had alarmed him, voices, multiple voices, coming from one of the tunnel entrances on the far side of the chamber, security teams, spreading out, searching. We'd been discovered. I ran, crossing the excavation floor in a sprint, my footsteps echoing off the ancient walls. David was already climbing the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, and I was right behind him. Behind us, I heard shouts. They'd spotted us. The gallery above, the tunnel beyond. We moved on pure adrenaline and training, not thinking, just executing the escape and evasion protocols we'd rehearsed hundreds of times. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit, boots on metal stairs, radio chatter, the distinctive sound of weapons being readied. We reached the upper tunnel level and ran. The facility's layout was burned into my memory from studying the satellite images, and I navigated by instinct, taking turns that should lead us back toward our entry point. But the tunnels all looked the same in our panic, and after the 3rd turn, I realized we were lost. "There," David pointed, to a junction ahead where I could see the vertical shaft of a ventilation duct. We ran for it, and I saw immediately it wasn't our entry point. The shaft was narrower, and the ladder rungs were spaced differently, but it led upward, and upward meant escape. David went first, climbing with desperate speed. I followed, my hands slipping on the metal rungs, my lungs burning. Below us, flashlight beams swept through the tunnel, accompanied by shouted commands in Farsi. 20 meters up. 30. My arms were screaming with fatigue, but fear kept me moving. Above me, I heard David reach the top and start working on the grill. "It's welded," he gasped. "Michael, it's welded shut." Below us, guards entered the shaft, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a round being chambered. "Hold on." I climbed past David, braced myself against the shaft wall, and kicked the grill with both feet. Once, twice. On the 3rd kick, I felt something give. The 4th kick tore the grill free, and it clattered away into the darkness outside. David went through first, and I pulled myself up and out just as the first gunshot rang out, the bullet sparking off the metal rung where my foot had been a second earlier. We were out, but on the wrong side of the facility, east instead of north, exposed on open ground with dawn beginning to lighten the horizon. Sarah's voice in my earpiece. "I see you. Run north, 30 degrees north." We ran. Behind us, more guards were emerging from the facility, and I heard vehicles starting up. They were going to pursue us into the desert. The next 20 minutes were pure survival. We ran until our lungs felt like they'd burst, navigating by Sarah's guidance over the radio, scrambling over salt flats and through shallow wadis that offered the only cover available. Behind us, vehicle headlights swept across the landscape, and twice we had to throw ourselves flat while SUVs passed within 100 meters of our position. We reached Sarah's position just as full dawn broke. She had our gear packed and ready, and the 3 of us moved immediately, heading north toward the border, pushing our exhausted bodies beyond what seemed humanly possible. We crossed back into Turkmenistan 36 hours later, dehydrated, sunburned, and running on pure adrenaline. Our extraction team met us at the predetermined coordinates, 2 Range Rovers with diplomatic plates and a very concerned-looking MI6 station chief who took one look at us and said, "What in God's name happened to you?" I handed him the encrypted memory card from my camera. "You need to see this," I said. "All of it. And then you need to decide who else sees it, because what we found down there, it's going to change everything." The debriefing lasted 6 days. They kept us at a secure facility outside of Ankara, a nondescript office building that looked like it housed an insurance company, but was actually a joint intelligence coordination center used by NATO allies. David, Sarah, and I were separated immediately upon arrival. Standard procedure, they said. They needed to document our accounts independently to verify consistency. What they really meant was, they needed to make sure we were telling the truth about what we'd seen, because what we'd seen was impossible. I sat in the same gray room for hours each day, answering the same questions over and over, while analysts pored over the photographs I'd taken. Patricia Harrow flew in on the second day along with 2 people I'd never met, a woman from GCHQ with a background in archaeology, and a man from the Ministry of Defense whose specialty was never clearly explained. They projected the photographs onto a wall screen, image after image of those cylindrical objects, the sphere on the pedestal, the underground ruins around that pit descending into darkness. "Walk us through it again," Patricia said, "from the moment you entered the first chamber." I did, for the 15th time. I described everything, the layout, the inscriptions, the way the objects seemed to be synchronized, generating heat, displaying patterns that moved across their surfaces like living code. The archaeologist, Dr. Sarah Pemberton, was particularly interested in the cuneiform inscriptions. She'd been studying the photographs for 2 days, cross-referencing them against databases of known Mesopotamian texts. "The script is authentic," she said. "Late Sumerian period, approximately 2100 BCE, but the content is unusual. Most of it is standard religious invocation, prayers to gods of the underworld, requests for protection from those who sleep below. But there are passages here that don't match any known texts. References to the first city, the builders who came before the flood, the knowledge that was sealed away. Mythology," the mod man said. His name was Carstairs, and he had the kind of face that suggested he'd spent his entire career being unimpressed by things. "Every ancient culture has flood myths and stories about lost civilizations." "Yes," Dr. Pemberton agreed. "But these texts also include technical specifications, descriptions of geometric patterns and mathematical ratios, instructions for what appears to be some kind of containment or preservation system. This isn't mythology, it's documentation." Patricia pulled up another photograph, the one showing the ruins arranged in concentric circles around the central pit. "Michael," she said, "when you looked into that pit, how deep would you estimate it went?" "I couldn't see the bottom," I said. "The scaffolding descended at least 50 meters, but below that it was too dark. The sound, though, that thrumming, it felt like it was coming from much deeper, hundreds of meters, maybe more." "And the Iranian excavation equipment," Carstairs said. "You documented cable systems, hoisting gear. They were pulling things up from below." "Yes, those cylindrical objects in the chambers, I think they came from the pit. The Iranians found something down there, something they've been retrieving and studying." Carstairs and Patricia exchanged a look that told me they'd already reached the same conclusion. "We've been tracking unusual purchases through back channels," Carstairs said. "Over the past 3 years, Iranian front companies have acquired specialized drilling equipment, seismic imaging systems, climate control technology rated for extreme conditions. We assumed it was related to their nuclear program, but the specifications never quite made sense for uranium enrichment." "They were building that facility," I said, "to excavate whatever is down there. The question," Patricia said, "is why? What could be worth that level of investment and secrecy?" Dr. Pemberton pulled up a close-up of the sphere on the pedestal, the one with patterns moving across its surface. "I think," she said slowly, "they found something they believe is a record, a repository of information from whatever civilization built those ruins. And those cylindrical objects are either storage devices or they're part of the mechanism for accessing that information." The room was silent for a long moment. "That's speculation," Carstairs said, but his tone suggested he thought it was plausible speculation. "What I want to know," I said, "is how old are those ruins? Dr. Pemberton, you said the cuneiform is from around 2100 BCE, but those ruins are buried too deep to be that recent. The geological layers above them—" "I know," Dr. Pemberton interrupted. "I've consulted with 2 geologists about the depth and preservation. Their preliminary assessment is that for structures to be that deep, sealed from surface erosion and intact, they'd need to be at minimum 10,000 years old, possibly much older." "That predates Sumerian civilization." "It predates everything," Dr. Pemberton replied. "The earliest evidence of complex human civilization is from around 4000 BCE in Mesopotamia. If these ruins are 10,000 years old or more, they suggest the existence of an advanced culture that we have no other record of." Carstairs stood up, pacing to the window. Outside, Ankara sprawled under a gray sky. "This stays compartmentalized," he said. "The 3 of you, everyone in this room, and a very small circle of senior leadership. Nothing gets filed in the standard intelligence databases. Nothing gets shared with allies, even the Americans." "Sir," I said, "with respect, the Iranians know what's down there. They've been studying it for years. Whatever information is contained in those objects, whatever technology, which is exactly why this stays quiet." Carstairs turned back to face me. "If word gets out that Iran has access to archaeological evidence of a prehistoric advanced civilization, do you have any idea what that would do to the geopolitical situation? Every country with archaeological sites would start digging for similar finds. Religious groups would lose their minds. And if those objects really do contain preserved information or technology from an unknown civilization, we're talking about a knowledge advantage that could shift global power dynamics in ways we can't predict." He was right, of course. Intelligence work is often about managing information as much as gathering it, knowing what to reveal, what to suppress, what to leak strategically. But sitting in that room, looking at photographs of impossible objects in an impossible city buried under the Iranian desert, I felt for the first time that we were managing something too big for our systems of control. The official conclusion of the debrief was straightforward. I had successfully penetrated an Iranian research facility and documented evidence of a significant archaeological discovery being kept secret from the international community. The recommendation was for continued surveillance of the site and monitoring of Iranian scientific personnel for any indication of what they were learning. My photographs were filed in a secure archive with a classification level I'd never seen before. David, Sarah, and I were debriefed on operational security, reminded of the consequences of discussing the mission with anyone, including each other. We signed documents that essentially said we'd never been to Iran, never seen anything unusual, and would face prosecution under the Official Secrets Act if we ever suggested otherwise. And then we were sent home. Back to London, back to our normal lives, as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened, and over the following weeks, I began to realize that the mission hadn't ended. It had just entered a different phase. I was reassigned to desk work. Nothing officially punitive, just a temporary rotation to help with analytical projects, while my field skills were being evaluated for future deployments. Standard procedure after a high-risk operation, they said. Except I knew it wasn't standard. I'd been removed from field work because someone in leadership had decided that what I'd seen made me a liability. David disappeared from MI6 entirely. I tried to reach him through normal channels and was told he'd resigned for personal reasons. His phone number was disconnected. His flat in Manchester was empty when I went to check. Sarah lasted another year before she left the service, took a job as a private security consultant, and moved to Scotland. I called her once, suggested we meet for coffee, talk about old times. "Michael," she said, and I could hear the wariness in her voice. "I think it's better if we don't stay in touch, for both of us." She hung up before I could respond. Over the next 2 years, I tried to continue working, tried to convince myself that I could just file the mission away as another classified operation and move on. But the images haunted me. Those cylindrical objects with their moving patterns, that sphere on the pedestal, the pit descending into impossible darkness. And I started noticing things. News reports, buried in international sections of newspapers, about unusual seismic activity in central Iran. Scientific papers published by Iranian researchers about novel crystalline structures with anomalous properties. Diplomatic cables, the ones I still had access to, mentioning Iranian delegations meeting with experts in ancient languages, theoretical physics, material science. They were studying what they'd found, making progress, learning things. And MI6 was doing nothing except monitoring and filing reports that disappeared into classified archives. In 2007, I made a mistake. I tried to raise concerns through official channels, submitted a memo suggesting we needed to take a more active approach to understanding what Iran had discovered. The memo never received a response, but 2 weeks later I was called into Patricia Harrow's office. "Michael," she said, and there was genuine sadness in her voice, "you need to let this go." "Let it go? Patricia, they're studying technology that could be thousands of years more advanced than anything we have. They're studying ruins and artifacts that we don't understand, that's all. Whatever the Iranians think they found, there's no indication it has any practical applications. It's archaeology, not a weapons program." "You don't believe that?" She looked at me for a long moment. "It doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is that this issue has been evaluated at the highest levels, and the decision has been made to maintain surveillance without intervention. That's the policy, and officers who can't accept that policy, well, they need to consider whether they're still suited for this work." I understood the message. Stop pushing or leave. I left. I resigned from MI6 in 2008, took my pension, and tried to build a civilian life. I worked as a security consultant for a few years, got married, got divorced, moved to a quiet neighborhood in London where nobody knew what I used to do for a living. And for 17 years, I kept my silence. I never talked about Iran, never mentioned what we'd found, never violated the Official Secrets Act I'd signed. But I couldn't stop researching, couldn't stop following the threads. I learned ancient Sumerian, studied Mesopotamian archaeology, read everything I could find about prehistoric civilizations and theories about lost knowledge. And slowly, piece by piece, I started to see a pattern. There were other discoveries in other places that had been quietly suppressed or dismissed. Unexplained structures found at impossible depths, artifacts with properties that didn't match their supposed age, sites that archaeologists had explored and then inexplicably stopped excavating. It wasn't just Iran. Whatever was buried beneath that desert, it wasn't unique. There was more, hidden around the world, waiting to be found, or already found and covered up. Evidence of something that came before recorded history, something that built cities and developed technology and then vanished, leaving only fragments buried so deep that geological time had almost erased them completely. And then, 3 days ago, that photograph appeared under my door. The photograph showed me in 2005, standing in front of one of those cylindrical objects, my camera raised, clearly documenting everything. The image quality was good, too good to have come from a security camera. This was taken by someone standing close to me, someone in that chamber, someone I never saw. On the back, they know you talked. But I hadn't talked. I'd kept silent for 18 years, exactly as I promised. Unless I spent 2 days reviewing everything I'd written, every digital search I'd conducted, every library book I'd checked out about Mesopotamian archaeology. Had I been careless? Had someone been monitoring my research, tracking my interest in subjects that connected back to that mission? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't need to have talked. My behavior had talked for me. Someone had been watching, noticed the pattern, and drawn conclusions. On the 3rd day, I received an email. Anonymous sender, routed through multiple proxies, subject line empty. The message contained a single line of text. You weren't the first team sent to look. You won't be the last. They're going deeper. And attached was a file, a satellite image of the Dasht Kavir facility dated 3 weeks ago. The surface structures had been expanded significantly. New buildings, new roads, and around the site, disturbed earth suggesting major excavation work. They were still digging, still studying. After 20 years, whatever Iran had found beneath that desert was still significant enough to warrant substantial ongoing investment. That's when I made my decision, the one that led me to make this video, the one that's probably going to destroy what's left of my comfortable retirement and possibly land me in prison for violating the Official Secrets Act. I'm telling you this story not because I think it will change anything. The governments who know about this have clearly decided that silence is the best policy, and they're probably right. The chaos that would follow public revelation of a prehistoric advanced civilization would be substantial. But I'm telling you because you deserve to know. Because somewhere under the desert in Iran, and possibly in other locations around the world, there is evidence that everything we think we know about human history is incomplete. That civilization is far older than we've acknowledged. That something came before us, built cities, developed knowledge, and either vanished or was deliberately buried. And because whatever they found down in that pit, whatever information is contained in those objects, someone is currently accessing it, studying it, potentially learning things that could reshape our understanding of reality itself. The photograph under my door was a warning, yes, but it was also a message. I'm not alone in this. Someone else knows what I saw. Someone else wants this information public. So here it is. All of it, on the internet, preserved forever, impossible to fully erase. If this video disappears, if I disappear, you'll know why. And if you work in intelligence, if you're in a position to access classified archaeological findings, if you've ever been sent to investigate something that didn't make sense and then been told to file a report and forget about it, reach out. Use secure channels. Find others who know. Because the biggest secret being kept isn't about weapons or politics or economic advantage. It's about our past, about where we came from and what we've forgotten. And those in power have decided we're not ready to know. Maybe they're right. Maybe the chaos and upheaval of revealing this truth would cause more harm than good. But I keep thinking about those cylindrical objects, synchronized, active, generating heat and displaying patterns like code. I keep thinking about that pit descending into darkness and the thrumming sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. Something is down there, something preserved, waiting, containing knowledge from a time before recorded history. And we're just ignoring it. Filing reports and maintaining silence while others study it, learn from it, potentially gain advantages we can't even imagine. That's the part that haunts me most. Not what we found, but what we chose to do with it afterward. Nothing. So if you've watched this far, if you've heard this story, and any part of you believes it might be true, I have one request. Don't forget. Don't let this become just another conspiracy theory that gets dismissed and buried. Keep asking questions. Keep searching for evidence. Keep pushing for transparency about archaeological discoveries that don't fit our established timeline. Because somewhere beneath the Iranian deserts, and maybe beneath other deserts, other mountains, other ancient places around the world, there are answers. Real answers about who we are and where we came from. And we deserve to know the truth, even if, especially if, that truth is unsettling. My name is Michael Ashford. For 9 years, I was an MI6 field officer. In 2005, I was sent to investigate a facility in Iran, and what I found there changed everything I thought I knew about human history. This is my testimony. This is what I saw, and whatever happens next, at least now, the truth is out there. If you made it this far, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. I'll be releasing more information as I can verify it. Safely, documents, additional photographs if I can acquire them from other sources, analysis of the cuneiform inscriptions Dr. Pemberton helped translate. This is just the beginning. Share this video, download it, make copies. Don't let it disappear into the memory hole of internet censorship. And if you're someone who knows something, someone who's been to similar sites, someone who's seen evidence of this prehistoric civilization, reach out. The contact information is in the description. Use encryption. Be careful, but reach out. Because this is bigger than any one government's secrets. This is about our species' history, about truth, about the right to know where we come from, even if that knowledge challenges everything we thought we understood. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for not forgetting. The truth is down there, buried beneath the desert, waiting. And they're still digging.